glad to be here, glad to reflect. It's good to see how far we've come, even in the implementation.
Someone can help us understand why we didn't declare it a national holiday.
Think about the gains and yes, what we've also lost, but to also hopefully be able to reharness that feeling of euphoria.
There might be a bit of disappointment on the pace of the implementation, but I think we are better than we were a couple of years back.
Why can't we have a Katiba scorecard at such a time as this, and then look back and see at the stakeholders who've been tasked with the implementation of this constitution?
And I'm hoping that being here together again might inspire us to take back our rightful role in our society when our country is falling apart.
We should probably, as CSOs, have gotten the first hint from the first day of promulgation that implementation was not going to be easy.
Because whatever we thought we had, we seem to be losing. Democratic spaces are closing, the media seems not to be as open as it used to be.
We did have expectations. We should be seeing real outcomes on the ground in terms of devolution now, and money's going into what we expected it to go into, and that having an effect on outcomes in terms of people's real lives. Are we? Are we not? Are any of us measuring that in any kind of way? I think that's part of the discussion we should have today. We've seen the executive issue unconstitutional administrative orders, for example, on the place of the provincial administration, which we expected to be gone. We've seen the executive override and undermine constitutional bodies that are meant to play a role in oversight or in realizing some of the gains, some of the aspirations around equality in the country. For example, the extremely delayed appointments to our national human rights institution, the Kenya National Human Rights Commission, and the National Cohesion and Integration Commission, or the ongoing power struggle between the Ministry of Lands and the National Land Commission. We've seen the executive ignore decisions and orders from constitutional bodies and the courts. We've seen the utilization of the Attorney General by the executive to undermine the spirit of the Constitution, for example, with respect to cooperation with the International Criminal Court or on payments for Anglo leasing. We've seen the utilization of the executive towards the personal ends and interests of those in the executive. For example, the role of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with respect again to the African Union and the ICC. And we've seen complete non-transparency and prevarication with respect to devolution and just this debate on revenue sharing and whether revenue sharing should be based on current accounts, and when in fact the allocation that they're parroting around are based on the 2009-10 accounts. We've seen a failure to consult with stakeholders on supporting legislation to the Constitution that is needed to implement the Constitution. For example, the bypassing of the Constitutional Implementation Commission, let alone other stakeholders from the public. We've seen extreme delays in passing supporting legislation. For example, the last batch of bills that we expected to be passed this month are now due in March 2015, and lo and behold, they're bills that concern public audit, public procurement, asset disposal, public services, environmental management, and persons deprived of liberty. We've also seen from the legislature this trend of tabling and passing unconstitutional legislation, forcing all of us to spend our time running to the courts to get declarations that this legislation is unconstitutional. We've seen extreme variance between different levels of the court, as well as between members of the bench at similar levels of the court, with respect to their upholding constitutionality and the quality of their judgments. Here, for example, I will give the matters raised by the civil society petition in respect of the presidential elections, and also more recently on the right to freedom of movement of refugees and asylum seekers present in Kenya. On the most important causes of conflict that the Kenya National Dialogue and Reconciliation Agreements were meant to address, and that our new constitution were meant to address, an improvement or increase in sort of the culture of constitutionalism, separation of powers and checks and balances, both nationally and at the county level, public involvement in oversight and accountability, the Bill of Rights, which this sector in particular fought so hard for, equality and anti-discrimination, including through devolution, security sector reform, and very fundamentally, as we've seen from Lamu to Mandera this week, land reform. It's not like civil society hasn't responded. We have. But like I said, I feel we've been on the defensive, completely overstretched, completely ridiculed and maligned post the elections of last year. And we can see the continuities on both sides, whether within the jubilants, whether within court, of politicians, public servants, what somebody framed the other day as tenderpreneurs, dating back to the first Kenyatta era. They're still there. They're still there. And that's one very important continuity, the continuity of people who've made their lives off this intersection between business and politics. From the pre-independence era on, during colonialism on, change has always happened through the engagement intellectually and politically of a small group of, for lack of a better word, I will lump it under progressives. We can unpack what I mean by progressives, but broadly people who come from a tradition of the left. We have a very weak ability to mass mobilize. I think the only period within our history where progressives alone were able to politically mobilize was in the 1930s through the trade union, managing to win seats at the Mombasa sort of representative base. So we've always relied on politics and politicians to mobilize, as problematic as that can be. I think those progressives who then try and engage with governance from within tend to do so from a very individualized basis. They have no base either within government, even when several progressives enter government or different arms of the state. They do not create that base within, and they certainly do not stay connected to the base outside. That's us. This sort of continuity of people who we know have been named in grand corruption scandals, instigation of political violence, etc. But just because they're on the opposition, we let them go scot-free. And I think we're seeing that tendency today, and we have to be much more critical around the sort of call for us to engage in OCOA. I think over the last year, until fairly recently, we've seen a complete lack of political opposition, complete disarray, no evidence at all that whether at county level in terms of some of the ridiculous kind of pieces of legislation that the county assemblies are wasting their time on, such as can women wear trousers when they're riding bicycles, but more importantly in terms of issues of national debate where you expect an opposition to stand up, and they're not within the national parliament, not within the Senate. Again, there's this question of continuities in the political opposition. But more importantly, I think, again, looking back at our history, I think we haven't really understood or fully grappled with what the fears of majoritarianism do in terms of distorting our engagement with even what we think are progressive ideas. We've never had the debate around really the fear of minority communities within the country, which has come to the fore much more so in this last year, given the kind of rabid xenophobia that we're seeing on social media, in the public domain, and so on. We have to actually grapple with the things that ended up being negotiated out of the Constitution by that cabal of politicians, business interests, and so on, like proportionality in the electoral system, that were intended to deal with fears of majoritarianism. I think we haven't grappled with that, and I certainly don't see that debate happening now, even in the sort of idea of what do we need to do with the Constitution. And the political opposition, like has always, that we've relied on for mass mobilization, use as a basis for mass mobilization pure ethnicity dating right back to how we were allowed to organize within the colonial period. And again, we need to start challenging whether and putting forward ideas on whether or not that kind of continuity is something that we should keep forward. Are we facing, again, a structural problem, or is this a problem of agency? If we got our new structure and that structure has been unable to contain agency, what do we need to do? Should our solutions still be normative? Should it still be institutional? Or should we be looking at really where are the negative incentives where are the incentives that could, or disincentives that could restrain and sort of confine and direct agency within the state? If structure is not shaping agency, what will? And I'm very much with what Beryl said earlier. I believe this question of impunity and the lack of accountability for gross systemic human rights violations, for grand corruption, for what happened to us in 2007, 2008 is a real problem. I think we need to really have a discussion on accountability as a means of deterrence and a means of shaping agency within the state. What has taken up so much time, this motion without movement, constant sort of we need a new law, we need a new institution. No, we don't. Not anymore. We need to focus on the laws and the institutions that we have. What outcomes are they giving us in terms of the expectations that people had? The reason the public came on board with the constitutional change movement of the 90s, what did they expect as outcomes in terms of their real lives? I think the agenda for progressives writ large, undefined, we can debate what that means, really has to be on accountability for the elections of 2013, for violence of 2007, 2008, and all the sort of periods of politically instigated violence we've had from before. Outcomes should be a focus as well in terms of security, in terms of inequality on ethnic and other grounds, in terms of people's expectations of devolution, and on land. In terms of sort of process and organizing, and Zarina's point about what do we need to do to sort of give ourselves energy again as process, I think we need, for those people who are thinking of engaging in one way, shape, or form with what may or may not become some sort of new movement, is how do we hold a base? How do we build a base for those who are engaging in that movement and for those who remain outside, to which we can hold ourselves accountable and move forward? And also, though, and this is really important, is how do we build a base for mass mobilization on other than ethnic grounds? We've been completely unable to reach out to people in a broader way, except through that sort of marriage before. And that marriage included, at that time, religious organizations who are completely ethnicized right now. So we really need to think, what is it we need to do in our daily lives with our families, with our friends, with how we ourselves live, socially, interact, organize, to begin to change the idea that political organization can only happen in the way the colonialists defined for us.
I'm actually glad that things have fallen apart this much, because it has exposed the charlatans, the hypocrites among us. Is it because you work for an NGO? Is it because one day you are tear gassed when trying to plant a tree at Freedom Corner? Is it because, like Onyango Law, you are once in prison? As we try to re-energize and say, what should we do? We have to rethink how we organize, because social transformation cannot be affordable. We have an opportunity of learning from other people. A few years ago, there was an election. Mustafa Barghouti was a presidential candidate. He was not Hamas. He was not PLO. He got 20% of the vote. Of course, they didn't win. But he's part of something called Al-Badara, the Palestinian National Initiative, the alternative.
Did you engage us for consultation so that we can have a collective position? You did not. You just went there. I'm sure because I'm a member of KPTJ. I'm a stakeholder in this movement, although I don't have. And why I'm saying so is this. Also, Mudhoni, you are at KHRC. You have a project of Mau Mau. Davinda is here. He owned that monument. How much is it mobilizing politically? Is it a tool to mobilize politically, to nurture alternative leadership that is talking about social justice? Is there political mobilization around all those historical injustices?
Over 85% of Kenyans have no clue what civil society is doing towards supporting devolution. And I asked the NDI, are you sure you asked the right question to over 14,000 people? They said yes. Find ways to outwit government. And if you can't outwit government, find ways to reconnect with citizenry and use the citizenry and the church. I have no clue what happened to the church. Probably Reverend Joya might tell us. But the civil society must find a way to reconnect with two constituencies, the citizenry and the church, and use that to build momentum to protect this constitution. Otherwise, you're going to watch as they're going to cut it to pieces. They're going to cut it to pieces. They will start with the referendum. They're going to cut it to pieces. By 2017, what you will have as a replica of this constitution will be something shameful.
What we need is a design school to redesign the ideology and the philosophy of the civil society to suit non-apex kind of or non-summit thing. Like you redesign the constitution and you do you correct ideas from the civil society does 1 year of study to correct ideas from the people before they start tailoring, not really designing, because the MC are not tailoring, they are not designing the constitution, they are tailoring to suit them. And the governors are not really redesigning the constitution, they want to tailor it to fit them. I've talked with many governors. Even yesterday I was with the Uhuru and many other people and Kibaki, and I was trying to advise them. I was on the pulpit preaching to them. And I was telling them that you who are theologians, ignore this. I was telling that equality and constitution, all this sovereignty begins with God becoming, stopping not to be president or patriarch, becoming human, incarnation, becoming level. And even, and I told you Uhuru directly, Uhuru, if you want to be a leader, you don't only accept the praises and the thanks and the glory. You accept the responsibility for those who are irresponsible. One way is to pay the penalty of sin if you have not sinned. In Kenya, you need a design school. And the design school should be started by the civil society to say, how would you amend the constitution to suit the people of Kenya, not to suit a political party, no, not to suit the governors. In that sense, how would you design the constitution in such a manner that devolution will work? Not that the governors will get their pay and their flag, or not the Senate. You don't design to suit the Senate that will be able to sanction the governors.
We need to have a way in which we can get mentorship from the generation that is moving on, so that they can pass on the baton and so that we can move on. I keep on asking myself, after the likes of, and especially as a woman, after the likes of Wangari Maathai and the others have gone, are there any women left 40 and under who can be counted on? I'm wondering where that generation is.
And whether we like it or not, we've had a soft coup in this country. We've had 2 botched elections. We've had a complete takeover of government. If anybody were to read in between the lines as to what the military is doing within all our institutions, then we've got a real onslaught coming. Now you've got 2 things to do. You can go out there and scream your head off, get on the streets and get yourself killed, or you can sit down and think about what do we do next. It is also very clear and it's evident to everybody that even within the struggle itself, and civil society isn't only the only one, there is an ethnicization, there is a closing of ranks, of certain ethnic groups, and there is an intimidation of society on a level that probably we haven't seen for a long time. Maybe this kind of thing we saw during President Moi's rule and during the Nyayo torture chambers. And I think the only way to deal with this is to be mature about this, is to sit down, re-strategize, and find out clearly who are our allies and who is the enemy. And I think it's only by planning that we're going to win this war, because it is a war that is actually going to, is happening.
What I'd imagine for us, what I'd imagine is important for us as a point of reflection is to look at the Constitution not as a bandage over our wounds. The wounds here being the historical injustices, because I feel when we had the Constitution, everyone thought about it as an answer to everything. One or another, we forgot about all the other problems we had. And when the Constitution came, it was the answer. To land, it was the answer. To inequality, it was the answer. And yet, given that situation, we overloaded the Constitution with expectations, with emotions, with strategies, and so much. Is it still, I'll use the word sexy, for us to go back and discuss issues of healing and reconciliation? Is it still sexy for us to go back and discuss issues of historical injustices? Why have we abandoned TJRC? And yet for me, that is going to be the foundation of so many things that are going to make the Constitution look more viable, are going to make the Constitution, in my opinion, be of more benefit to the Kenyans.
How do we define this vision? Because that's where the gap is. People are now joining civil society that are not even aware of this vision or the vision of the movement. Antonio Gramsci even said that civil society is the arena for manufacturing and propagating ideas. So you can use it, even the government uses the civil society platform to propagate its ideas, so that you come up with ideas that whatever is there, even if it's bad for people, the subordinate classes, they feel that they are part of it. You don't have to use force. You can just say that the system, and through propaganda say that whatever is there is working for them in terms of hegemony and counter-hegemony. Like now the ethnic hegemony in Kenya, and everybody, I think, has bought into it, including the media and everything. So as part of civil society, I think what we need to do and invest in, and that's the only way we can win, because we don't have the arms to fight anybody, is just to develop that idea, our vision of democracy. And that will help us know who we can ally with.
Anything that does not capture property is not aimed at capturing property or resources, which is a market and it is a business, or does not aim at capturing power, which is political parties and everything. Everything else is civil society, because it is there to capture values or to realize values, to realize ethos, beliefs. If you are in the church, you are civil society. So I mean, anything that is not government or it is not market is civil society. And I think we are there, not in between. It is them who have come after us. The civil society was there before there was state.
I know how people, it was at the constitutional wing, the constitutional human rights wing, and I know how hard people were trying to fight for certain rights to be guaranteed and to be upheld. And I know that some justices are also progressive in that regard. So it's about bit by bit we would inch forward and get to that realization. In South Africa, for instance, I know that the judiciary, the constitutional court, played a very, very major role after the new constitution was passed. And that may be something we might want to sit and consider as well, engaging with the judicial officers on how they could help make sure the implementation of the constitution is a reality. Because if the justices pass case or make judgments that are progressive and support the constitutional provisions, then it could be a stepping stone to other things.
So we also have devolution. So I had a lot of debate about the issue of the county development board or something like that. What happened in our country is the provinces, which are our counties, I think, are supposed to be headed by the provincial chairperson. So what the ruling party did is that they appointed what they call the provincial ministers from the party, so that they will head, whoever is elected as the chairperson of the province will become the deputy, and the provincial minister will become the overseer. So it's a similar situation. So I think we're in the same trenches. So that's why I'm here. I hope I will learn a lot that I'll take home.
What I can say so far is that Constitution is something like everybody would like to shape to fit their interests, and what is going on in DRC. We would like to amend the Constitution. There is like a kind of contest between the ruling party and the opposition, because somebody is looking forward to a third term in office, and it's very sad. The other thing that we have in common with Kenya is that beyond tribe and clan division, politics is seeming to not be able to thrive, to go forward. So we should be able to overcome that.
We've got a leadership that I think is problematic, and that has been said in very many different ways. But we've also got an opposition. Ordinarily, the opposition ought to be the progressive group, but there isn't evidence, there isn't confidence that the opposition is sufficiently progressive. It is making noises that can be confused for progress, but it isn't actually progressive. So the choices for us are very clear. Either, and she was also talking about, you can't make progress unless you're able to mobilize. If we speak among ourselves here, it will remain here. Whatever good ideas that we have here, the next thing for them to be effected is we've got to have a capacity to mobilize and therefore translate those ideas into the general population. We have not, as she said, had the capacity to do so. The only people who have the capacity to mobilize are the politicians, and they mobilize in a manner that is extremely destructive of our collective interests. So the choices are to join politics and take it from there and roll with the punches and so on and so forth, or be able to then work in a manner that either join politics and mobilize using those platforms, or join progressives in politics and try and mobilize using their leverage. Whoever you see as political champions right now, takes for example CORD and ODM, very misguided on a number of issues. The question has got to be, is there something in them that can be saved? And I think personally that there is, and that they could be talked to and be told, for example, what they want around, for example, the referendum. They framed a referendum that is supposed to be solving the country's problems by amending the constitution one more time. If it is felt, and I think some people feel, that the referendum is in some way misguided, one could then tell them, really your problem about the country's your issue about how problematic the country is, and the country is problematic at one level because of exclusion. People can't be excluded perpetually, as Jubilee is promising to do for another 20 years. So if you're telling, if that is, for example, the problem, it can be solved by, say, telling the people, let's have a referendum. It can only be solved by a demonstration to the largest segment of the population that exclusion in the end hurts everybody. And you can't run a society where some people have power and others are excluded from accessing power, or the rules of handing down power are so opaque that some people can't ever know whether or not they've lost, and they're told just accept and move on. If that is then you've got to then tell them, we are going to work with you and use your leverage at the political level to demand accountabilities that will answer questions about how elections, for example, are held, and who wins and who gets to win power and who gets to lose power, so that everybody can accept that these are the rules for accessing power and these are the rules for losing power, so that then society remains stable. Either we've got to have a political agenda, a very overt political agenda of our own, or we've got to join those people who are already in politics and tell them, this is the agenda that we have, and the agenda that you're carrying is false, so we'll give you the correct agenda for the country, and we'll work with you and try and save this country. That is what I see personally as something that I can carry forward from tonight's reflection. Otherwise, thank you very much.